Pacis Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. On the Novus Ordo calendar, we have the feast of Saint Claude de la Colombière. And so I'm offering a votive mass. So you can offer a mass for any canonized saint, but if it's not on the calendar, it's a votive mass. So that's what we're doing today, votive mass of Blessed Saint Claude de la Colombière. So I will speak about him, and he was a Jesuit priest in the 17th century, spiritual advisor, confessor to Margaret Mary Alacoque, instrumental in getting the devotion to the Sacred Heart propagated. So we take it for granted now, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, but he very much helped her to make that popular. But first, note, the saints for today, commemorated saints for today, Saint Faustinus and Jovita, these were brothers, born noblemen in Brescia, Italy. And it was, this is going to be around, what's the time of the Emperor Hadrian is when they were martyred. But their zeal was such that they preached the gospel even when the bishop of their town had gone into hiding and was silent. They continued to preach and to witness to the faith. For that reason, they were imprisoned. And they have a great story because they wanted to make an example out of them. And so they took these two brothers and they had them martyred, thrown to the wild beasts in the amphitheater, and they wanted to get as many people as possible to witness this. Look at what happens when you defy the governor. Look at what happens when you preach the faith after we've told you not to do it. So they got these two brothers in that amphitheater, and by their constancy in enduring their sufferings, there were some other miracles as well. They converted 15,000 of the spectators. See what happens when you defy God. See what happens when you resist God. See what happens when you try to stamp out the faith. That was the message God was sending to the Roman government, right? And that is how evil always backfires on itself. They brought as many people as possible, thinking that they were going to impress the people and continue their efforts to discourage conversions. It had the precise opposite effect. So it's this story of Faustinus and Jovita. Stories of these and similar to these, why I'm not worried about what's happening in the country right now. I am not worried. Biden is president, everything's going on the tubes. The way that God reverses things is by letting evil get exactly what it wants. Now, we may have to suffer imprisonment and torture and so on, so we shrink from that, but if we have more courage, how could I say this? They go together. Faith and courage go together. If we're not afraid to face that, then we'll be at peace, and then we'll see, our faith will be absolutely rock solid. It is rock solid, what we believe in. There's just no reason to be agitated or upset or to fear. So pray for courage, pray for faith. Thus my side comments. And I said I wanted to keep these sermons shorter, and I've abbreviated those two lives of the saints there. But Saint Claude de la Colombière, just absolutely fascinating and wonderful saint. I would say for the church, especially for these, I would not say for the Novus Ordo church, but for the traditional church, he's a really important figure. In that he was a spiritual director, as I said, to Margaret Mary Alacoque in the 17th century. He was one of 7 children, and 4 of them entered the religious life. He entered the Jesuits at 17 and was ordained a priest about 11 years later. And he gained notice for the clarity and soundness of his sermons, which he preached against Jansenism. Now, Jansenism at the time was an offshoot of Calvinism. And Jansenism was this theological movement, primarily active in France, that emphasized original sin, human depravity, the absolute necessity of divine grace, and predestination. It was heretical. And it was condemned by the church repeatedly, and very much like today's modernists, the Jansenists at the time said that they agreed with condemnations. They said that they agreed with the doctrines and teachings of the church, but they just they hid their doctrines a little bit more cleverly and continued to preach heresy and so on. Their basic, if I could summarize it, was nothing you do is pleasing to God. I should take that back. That's Calvinism, Protestantism. You don't know that anything you do is pleasing to God. You could be in mortal sin right now and not know it. All of your confessions could be invalid. All of your Holy Communions could be sacrilegious, and you don't know. That's Jansenism. And all you can do is beg for God to send his grace upon you, but there are some people that God predestines to hell, and there's nothing you can do about it. Right? That's Jansenism. Now, we get this confused in the traditional church. You may hear people like, oh, that guy's a real Jansenist. What they mean is he's a rigorist, and the two are connected. Rigorism is the idea that Jansenism doesn't exist in the church anymore, by the way. That was a heresy that was defeated, but the mark that it left was rigorism, because Jansenists were absolute rigorists. A rigorist is someone who, when you have a choice between like two options, like I'm not sure what to do, like this could be morally permissible or it might not be morally permissible, like how do I know which is which? The rigorist says if there's the slightest chance it might not be permissible, you can't do it. If there's the slightest chance it could possibly be a sin, you can't do it. Even if there's overwhelming evidence that, it's probably not a sin, it's most likely not a sin, you might be a little bit scrupulous, the rigorist says, no, you can't do it at all, because it's better to be safe than sorry. If there's the slightest chance you might be offending God, possibly, don't do it at all. And you can't live life that way, because the human mind, it worries, it thinks things, and that's a surefire way to scrupulosity. So because the Jansenists were absolute rigorists, which is a position condemned by the church, they were associated with that. You're a Jansenist, meaning you're a rigorist. And so we still hear that today. In the traditional church, rigorism or Jansenism, for somebody who is... and really, it's associated with pride, right? They are always careful. No, you have to avoid sin. You have to avoid sin. And typically, it's certain kinds of sins. The rigorists tend to be those of the melancholic or choleric temperament. It's very easy for them to avoid certain sins. It's very easy. They're not even tempted by it. It's very easy for them to give up certain things, so it should be for you as well. Well, I don't care about entertainment. I don't watch movies. I don't watch TV. I don't go to the theaters. I don't go to the beach. And there's a slightest chance those things might be sinful, so nobody should do them at all. You should stop going to the beach, going to the movies, watching TV, all these things, because you could sin, right? That's the rigorist attitude. Anyways, I could go on about this, but that is what Claude de la Colombière was fighting against. He was preaching against that. That is not true. That is not how God is. And he was already devoted to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, right? Which we don't have condemnation from the Sacred Heart. We have love, right? The people who condemn themselves, or rather I should say evil condemns itself, right? That is where condemnation comes from. Evil hates what is good. So he's already, he's preaching against Jansenism, rigorism. He's preaching the devotion to the Sacred Heart, which wasn't, St. John Eudes had started the devotion to the Sacred Heart, or rather I say gave it a mass and an office, but it wasn't widespread. It wasn't until he'd been a priest for about 5 years, he was assigned to the spiritual director of the Visitation Sisters at Paray-le-Monial, among whom was Margaret Mary Alacoque. And nobody believed her. They all thought she was crazy, she was having visions, she was a kook, she was whatever. Very, very hard for her, and her spiritual directors, her confessors, didn't understand her. Finally, Claude de la Colombière comes along, he understands, he believes her, and that's a very great relief for her. But this is what God always does. He didn't just let her rest and be like, oh, finally somebody who understands and believes me, thank you very much. He told her, write your visions down. Write down what you're seeing. Write down what he's telling you. You have a job to do. She's like, oh, I don't want to do that. I'd rather be poor and unknown. I don't want to have any fame or notoriety. And he says, too bad, tough, you got to write this down. So there's always a challenge for the saints. So he was there for about 3 years, and he helped her to publish her diary, and it became absolutely famous very quickly. And even in her lifetime, and of course continues today. A great devotion of the church, a devotion to the Sacred Heart. Claude de la Colombière, for his part, would be assigned to, after that, to be the confessor to Mary Modena, the wife of King James II. Well, he wasn't king yet, but he would be. And he's in England. He would be the English king as a Catholic in the late 1600s. England is Protestant by this point. England is Anglican. They're very anti-Catholic, and yet they would get King James II, who was an Anglican, but he converted secretly. And then he became king, and it was kind of a big deal there in England. So that's why Claude de la Colombière was sent to the royal palace in England as confessor, as a Jesuit. And Jesuits were hated in England. So he was accused of taking part in a plot to overthrow the king, to restore Catholicism. He was thrown in prison. It ruined his health. He was treated very, very roughly. Eventually, King Louis XIV asked for his release and got it. And then he went back to France. He tried to continue preaching and teaching. He wasn't able to do so after about 3 years. He retired to Paray-le-Monial, where he died today he was 41 years old is when he died. The day after his death, Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque received a vision in which she understood that Claude needed no prayers as he was already in heaven. And he's considered what we call a white martyr, having suffered every abuse for the faith except death. Now, in the very little time I have remaining, I will squeeze in a couple of things here. The prayer of Claude de la Colombière to God, his prayer of hope and his prayer of, I would almost say, his prayer of predestination, why he believed that he would be saved, and then a vow that he took with the Jesuits. The Jesuits, one of their vows is they have poverty, chastity, obedience, or poverty, chastity, obedience with a specialty on obedience. That's their special charism. But he takes this vow, this very hard vow, and you would think this is what a rigorist says everybody should do. And he was preaching against that. But then he took it himself. That's always a sign of sanctity, is you're hard on yourself but easy on others. But he says he made a vow to observe all the rules of his order, and he bound himself to practice continual mortification in all things. And he says, on the 6th day, when I was considering this particular vow which I made, I found myself filled with great gratitude to God who gave me the grace to make this vow. I experienced great joy at seeing myself bound with 1,000 chains to do the will of God. The thought of this obligation, far from terrifying me, filled me with intense joy. Far from being made a slave by it, I feel that I have entered the kingdom of liberty and peace. He says, I feel also, I have so often tasted great interior joy from the thought that I am in the service of God. I realized this is worth infinitely more than the favor of kings. The occupations of worldly people appear despicable to me in comparison with our occupation in the service of God. I feel an increasingly great desire to be attached to the observance of my rule. The practice of it causes me the greatest pleasure. The more exact I become in the observance of it, the more I seem to enter into the enjoyment of perfect liberty. This exact observance is certainly not burdensome to me. On the contrary, my yoke makes me feel lighter. I regard this as the greatest grace I have ever received during my life. He continues, I look with respect on those whom God visits with humiliations and adversity, of whatever nature they may be. These are, doubtless, his favorites. The following words never come to my mind, except the words light, peace, liberty, consolation also come with them. These words are simplicity, confidence, humility, entire abandonment, nothing kept back, the will of God, my rules. That was Saint Claude de la Colombière's vow. Now, what do you think? What kind of a prayer would he say? What would he think of himself having made this vow and having kept it? And it was said, his contemporaries said, his superiors said, he kept this vow perfectly. Perfectly, he kept this vow. What did he write in a prayer? My God, I am so persuaded that you watch over all who hope in you, and that nothing can be lacking to those who await from you all things, that I have determined to live from now on without any concern, letting go and giving you all my anxieties. I will sleep and rest in peace, because you, Lord, and only you have secured my hope. Men can deprive me of possessions and reputation. Illnesses can take away my strength and my means to serve you. I myself can lose your grace because of sin, but I will not lose my hope. I will conserve it until the last instant of my life, and all the efforts of demons trying to take it away from me will be useless. I will sleep and rest in peace. May others expect happiness in their talents and richness. May others lean on the innocence of their life, or the rigors of their penance, or on the amount of their good works, or the fervor of their prayers. But for myself, Lord, all my confidence lies in confidence itself, because you, Lord, only you have secured my hope. No one has ever been deceived by this confidence. No one who has waited on the Lord has been frustrated. Therefore, I am sure that I will be eternally happy because I firmly hope to be, and because you, my God, are he in whom I expect all. Now that prayer continues, but look at the difference. Look at the difference between the vow he took to practice continual mortification, continual and perfect obedience. That's an incredible accomplishment. That's an incredible zeal. That's an incredible talent. And yet he said that's not why he hoped. He didn't hope for salvation in his talents or his obedience or his virtues or whatever. He hoped in the mercy of God purely. My hope is my hope that God, you will me to be saved. That's why he hoped. So that is the difference. I would like us all to try to imitate how you could say that combination of an earnest and a serious desire to do rigorous penance, to be very obedient, to be very mortified, but that at the same time to trust completely in God and in his mercy, not to worry about whether I succeed or I fail or I sin or I don't sin or I'm perfect or I'm a sinner. It is all about hope in the mercy of God. Try as hard as we can and then throw ourselves in the mercy of God, and then don't worry, be at peace. I wish for all of us to have combine these two attitudes, these two virtues. So let's ask for the intercession of Blessed Saint Claude de la Colombière for that virtue, Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque, and indeed all the saints. May God bless you all. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.